So let us begin. Okay, good. If people pop in, we'll try to catch them up as it goes. So we began from the beginning last week, and I just want to get, I don't want to do the whole thing, but I want to get to the part that we want to focus on. We want to discuss today the concept of contracts, the Jewish concept of, the halachic concept of contracts. It's a very important topic. So the background, which part of which we analyzed last week, was that the Mishnah on Daf Beis Amud Aleph. Again, if those who are following in the Marmakomos that we gave out, so we started with the stuff from the beginning. So that's on page 2. It says Talmud Babli Masachet Gittin Beis Amud Aleph. I'm just going to catch us up to the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph, but you'll see. So on Daf Beis Amud Aleph, the Mishnah starts by saying, "Oh, welcome." Okay, we have one of our regulars.
Oh, Andy, your call. Hi, Andy.
A little
Back
bit
from Israel.
Okay, good. That's always a good reason. So the Mishnah says, and just a little bit of background information, I'm glad you got on. Maybe get me Medina Sayam, that if a person, this is the first Mishnah in Gittin. Again, not necessarily the proper way to start. Where we started makes more sense, but the Mishnah records that if a get is given across countries, meaning from Medina Sayam, from Chutz Laaretz to Eretz Yisrael, right? So tzarich sheyomar b'fanei nachtam b'fanei nachtam. The shliach, the agent who delivers the get, we're talking about a long distance divorce. So somebody from some place in Europe, let's say, or America, sends with an agent sends a divorce contract. Sadly, the marriage ended, and he sends a divorce contract to his soon-to-be former wife, and she's in Eretz Yisrael. So the halacha is that the agent has to be able to declare, tzarich sheyomar b'fanei nachtav b'fanei nachtam, that this, this divorce contract was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence. That's the requirement of b'fanei nachtav b'fanei nachtam. Now this is a din d'Rabbanan. This is a rabbinic requirement. It's not a biblical requirement, but this rabbinic requirement, reflects concern that, biblical laws maybe will be violated, rendering the get invalid. So what are they? What does this require? Then the Mishnah goes on, as we discussed last week. We read some of this last week to discuss the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. We'll get back to that another time, but not for now. So this requirement that the shliach, that the agent declare b'fanei nachtam, it was written in my presence, it was signed in my presence. Like, well, what does it accomplish? What's the purpose of it? So the Gemara on the bottom of Beis Amud Aleph says, "My taima." What is the reason for that? And if you look in the Marmakomos, it's again on page 2, where it says Gemara, "My taima Rabba Amar," right before, and then continues Talmud Bavli Gittin Beis Amud Beis. So if anybody has trouble finding it, just let me know. So the Gemara says, "My taima Rabba Amar lefi she'ein b'kiyam lishma, Rabba Amar lefi she'ein edem mitzuyim l'kayim." So the Gemara says that there's a debate between Rabba and Rabba. Rabba was of the opinion. Rabba said like this: this get is coming from Chutz Laaretz, from Medina Sayam, from the diaspora to Eretz Yisrael. And the thinking was, and the Gemara elaborates this later, we'll discuss it, that the people in Chutz Laaretz were not, as proficient, trained or proficient as the people in Eretz Yisrael. And some of them didn't know that a get needs to be lishma. Lishma means that it was written, exclusively for this couple.
Actually, only one part of the get has to be lishma.
Well, this is what we're getting at a little bit. We'll see in a moment. So the get has to be written lishma. It can't be like a generic factory, ordered. Even if the names happen to be right. Let's say they took like a poll or something. I don't remember what it was. Somebody told me, because this coincides with my secular name, that for many years the word Michael, I guess, was the most popular, name not in the Jewish world, I don't think, but in America or something. And I don't know I'm not sure what the what the female equivalent was, Sarah or Barbara or whatever it was. So some, smart, Chazan is here. We're happy to greet him. Some smart businessman who wants to, run an efficient, mail order.
He produces a bunch of them.
Factory. So he knows to put. It's like if you go to the store, and you want to buy a kippah, for your children or your grandchildren. So they have, how do they know their names? They take the popular names. So,
but is that the only psul? Is that the only psul that could happen with a get?
No. That we're saying what's not allowed to happen with a get. A get needs to be lishma, and therefore, but the people in the diaspora weren't always aware of that. Rashi says, "Ein b'nei Medina sayam b'nei Torah." The people in the diaspora, not like today, like the Fifth Avenue.
Well, was Babel included in that?
What's that?
Was Babel included in that?
So that's a great question. We'll discuss that at some point. But relative to Eretz Yisrael, for sure. But whether Babel is different, Ein b'nei Medina hayam b'nei Torah, says Rashi. Bein yodim shetzarich lichtov haget l'shem ha'isha. They weren't aware that you can't have a mail order generic, accurate get. They didn't know you needed lishma. Ukroksi, but it's a pasok. Torah says v'kasav la sefer krisos. So v'kasav la hainu lishma. It has to be written for her specifically. Hilkach omer hashliach b'fanei nachtam. Umimela shailina, they'd ask him, they'd say, Im niktav lishma, was it written lishma? But who omer in, he'd say yes if it was. Ulekame mefarish, my time alo atzarchu nami lemeimar. Why didn't he have to say b'fanei nachtam lishma? See, Rabbi Roth is with us. We'll greet him as well. So the point is that Rabba thinks that you need to this proclamation because we're worried that people would be lax about the requirement or ignorant about the requirement of b'fanei nachtam. Rava amar lefi she'ein edem mitzuyim l'kayim. Rava said, no, that's not. We're not worried about that. What we're worried about is something else. The communication and the transportation between diaspora and Eretz Yisrael was very choppy. There were a lot of political strife and there were logistical problems. And therefore, the concern was that if the get is delivered from Chutzlar, from the diaspora to Eretz Yisrael, that if any kind of challenge were to be forwarded, meaning, let's say the husband would say, I didn't write that get, it's a forgery.
Women are a little different.
So if that were to be the case, then the concern would be that you wouldn't really be able to verify it because the communication and the transportation.
Someone needs to go on mute.
From one to the other.
There would be no access to the Adam. Is that the point?
What?
Yeah. Hello?
So as such,
There would be no access to the Adam, right?
yeah, the people wouldn't have access to proper witnesses. So they thought they would take care of it right in Meirosh.
But if you hold that the only Adam that count,
it became a problem.
but if you hold that the only Adam that count is the Adam that delivered the
Give them that what?
if you hold that the only Adam that count is the Adam that delivered the get, then you wouldn't have a problem, right?
Well, okay, so we're going to discuss. That's what we're going to discuss pretty soon. So so the Gemara has two different reasons why you have to say b'fanei nachtam. Then the Gemara analyzes them, and then the Gemara says what's the difference between them. That's the next line. The Gemara says my benayu. We're not going to go into that right now. We read it last week, and then after that, the Gemara says either way, you need two witnesses instead of one because this is a davar shebe'erva. This affects the status of the Eshes Ish. So then the Gemara says, no, really, it's not a very serious concern. We're worried about a very minority of cases, and therefore one witness would be enough to be able to establish the b'fanei nachtam. That's kind of what the Gemara says. That's what we discussed last week. Now, if you go to the bottom of Gimel Amid Aleph, we get to what we want to zero in on today. The Gemara, the last line on Gimel Amid Aleph, says man haitana deboy ksiva lishma uboy chasima lishma. So according to Rabba, we said the reason for b'fanei nachtam is because you need the get to be exclusively written for this man and for this woman. You can't have any kind of generic get, and therefore you have to say b'fanei nachtam. So the Gemara says if that's the case, why do you have to say both b'fanai nachtav and b'fanai nachtav? The nachtav, the ksiva refers to the text of the get. The text of the get includes things like, hareat, migureshes, or hareat muteres, l'chol adam, right? You are now free to marry anybody you want. There's a text that establishes the termination. We discussed this already. Termination of the relationship between husband and wife, which also includes typically her, freedom, to marry whoever is appropriate.
That's the text that applies to all people, no matter who it is.
Exactly. So either you need, the Gemara says, why do you need lishma on the ksiva and on the chasima, of course? Let me explain the chasima. The chasima is the actual signatures of the witnesses. So let's say this text is written, and then it's signed by, by two witnesses. So what the Gemara basically says is there's an argument whether the main part of the get is the writing, the text, or the main part of the get is the signatures. But either way, it would seem that you have to choose one or the other. And this is something that stems from the argument between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer, which we're going to see in just a moment. Ede Mesira Karsi or Ede Chasima Karsi.
Yeah, but the issue,
the essence of a contract, the text, and the fact that it is delivered in the presence of two witnesses, but you don't really need signatures fundamentally at all, or is the essence of a contract the signatures in the get itself? That's the argument.
But even more fundamental, isn't the issue of the Shema would seem to apply more logically to the kasiva than the chasima. What's the Shema for the chasima? The kasiva, I have to know that I'm writing it for Reuven and Rachel, and the right Reuven and the right Rachel.
Right, but which part of the get needs to be written with all of that in mind? Is it the text, or is it what's unique? Remember, the text is something that is applicable to every single get. What makes this get different in terms of is the fact that it is delivered.
But if you look at it logically, the Sofer's Lishma is in the writing of the text that it's Reuven Smith and Leah Goldberg that are getting divorced. That he has to know. The person who's signing is only signing that a transaction took place in front of him.
Right, but as we'll see,
there's really less Lishma issues in his signing, you would think logically. I mean, logic doesn't always win the case. Right. Then there would be in the ksiva. Because I have to know, I'm the sofa. I have to know that this is not printed in a factory, that it's party A and party B. Right. All that the chasima is saying is that this transaction took place in front of me. He doesn't even have to know who they are. He just has to know it took place in front of me. So there's less. Right.
So that makes sense. What you're saying makes a lot of sense, but with the wild
but
card,
it's not correct.
It's not correct completely because of the following wild card, meaning the Torah itself says v'kasav law sefer krisis, and the word law is a source for the lishma. So therefore, the way that the Chachamim understood it was that it's the critical ksiva, not just ksiva, but the ksiva that matters, the ksiva that is responsible for the change in the status. And that's where the difference between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Meir emerges. Basically, according to Rabbi Eliezer, as we'll see, we'll look in Rashi in just a minute, according to Rabbi Eliezer, when the Torah says v'kasav law, sefer krisis, v'kasav means v'kasav, because it can't mean v'kasam, because in the Torah, you don't even require people to sign in the contract at all. We'll get to this. But for Rabbi Meir, who thinks that there is a requirement to sign by the witnesses, and the signature of the witnesses is the critical, ingredient that makes the get into a get. So then the idea of lishma is the lishma has to take place, has to be manifest in the part of the get, right, that is crucial, to its effectiveness. And for Rabbi Meir, who requires that there must be eidei chasima, that if you just had a text and you were to hand it over, without witnesses, or even in the presence of witnesses, but they weren't, written in the text itself, that would be nothing.
But as I
And
recollect,
therefore, what makes the get a get is the Eidei Chasima. And
Well,
since that's what
Mayor-
makes the get a get, that's when you need. Now, again, the thought of, so give me one more second. The Lishma is still, when the witnesses sign, they need to sign knowing that this get is for Ruvain, and for Sarah, not some generic Ruvain and Sarah. So it's the same principle, but the idea is, does v'kasav mean v'kasav or v'kasav mean v'kasam? Either way, we're trying to zero in on the part of the get that is, legally effective, and that's where the argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Meir come into play. So let me just read this line. And then
if I remember correctly, Rabbi Meir is not contesting that Kesiva has to be also the Shema.
He does. He absolutely does. Or
Yeah, at the end of the day, doesn't he say that? Don't we say that he's saying also that you need the Chasima Lishma? Not that
we're actually going to flip it. Rabbi Eliezer says that if there is we'll get to it soon, but it's the opposite. Yeah. So one more time, the Gemara says, Man Haitana, who is the author of the Mishnah? The boy Ksiva Lishma, Uboy Chas. If you're following in the Gemara, you can turn the page. Uboy Chasima Lishma. We're on Gimel Amud Beis, and if you're in the Marmakomos that were sent out, we are on page 3 in those Marmakomos. Okay, we're about to start, the beginning of Gimel Amud Beis. That's on page 3, I believe. Okay, so the Gemara says, who's the author that requires both Ksiva and Chsima? Because it says B'fanei Nachta, B'fanei Nachta. The Gemara says, Rabbi Meir. Is everybody with me? Rabbi Meir. If it's the position of Rabbi Meir, who's Rabbi Meir? So look at Rashi for a minute.
The Chasima is important.
Yeah, look at Rashi on the top of Gimel Amud Beis. Rabbi Meir de Amar, Ikar Hashtar, Zuhi Chasimaso.
Right.
The main part of a star is the signatures of the star, right? So then, Chasima boy, Ksiva lo boy. Look at Rashi. Chasima lishma boy. You need the signatures should be written lishma. The chiksiv v'kasav la. Because for him, the word v'kasav doesn't really mean writing the story. It means a chasima ksiv kidikatani. Like, come on, that's how he knows when the Torah says v'kasav la. He's saying the Torah is telling you need chasima sa'edin, right? Because ksiva doesn't mean writing; it means writing the critical, parts, and that means chasima. Kidigl kaman, kasav laget ala mechubar. We're going to see in a moment. The Torah says v'kasav la sefer krisus v'nasam biyada. So the Gemara, as we'll see in just a second, derived from this later on in the Gemara Nafchaf Aleph Amud Beis, that a get cannot be written on something which is attached to the ground. Why? Because it says v'kasav la sefer krisus v'nasam biyada. So the limud is that once there's a ksiva, it has to be immediately omed, has to have the potential for nesina. V'kasav la sefer krisus v'nasan biyada. If there's an obstacle from the kasav till the nasan, that disqualifies the get. So now the question is, what is the mechubar? What is the moment of mechubar that disqualifies the get? So the position of Rabbi Meir is that since the kasav means v'chasam, it's a little complicated, but I hope everybody's with me. If not, just ask.
Or we could write it, detach it, and then sign it.
So if at the time of the ksiva, it was mechubar, let's say you wrote it on a tree that was attached to the ground.
Not a problem.
And it as long as it was detached before the chasima, before the signatures, then that would be fine, because he doesn't care about the ksiva. Now, this isn't an issue of lishma, this is an issue of mechubar, but it's the same principle, because it determines how you read the pasok of the kasav.
It depends on what the definition of a kasav is.
Yeah, so if the kasav means v'chasam, so then even if it's written on a tree, as long as then you cut off the tree from the ground and then you signed it when it was talush, then that's fine. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says Ede Masira Karsi, and who says that the word v'kasav doesn't mean v'kasav, doesn't mean signatures, it means the text of the get. If you were to write the text of the get when it was mechubar, when it was connected, when the tree was connected to the ground, and then you cut the tree off and you want to use the tree or parts of the tree as a get, that would be no good, right? So that's what Rashi is quoting, and that's what the Gemara is quoting here. Kosav get ala mechubar, says Rashi, kosher. If you write the get on something attached to the ground, according to Rabbi Meir, it's kosher. Even though it says you write it and then you give it. Mi she'ena mechusar ela ksiva unasina, yatzaz eshu mechusar ksiva ketzitza unasina. The Gemara later on says that if you write it when it's mechubar, it's pasok. Afilahachi kiva dechasmu betalush machshir le Rabbi Meir. But Rabbi Meir thinks v'kasav doesn't mean literally v'kasav; it means v'chasam. Therefore, for him, if you write it when it's mechubar, but you sign it when it's not mechubar, everything is good. Alma v'kasav dekra kasimahu. That's Rabbi Meir is very serious about rereading or reinterpreting the word v'kasav to mean v'chasa. However, let's go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says, "Rabbi Meir chasima boy ksiva lo boy." Tetnan ein kosvin v'mechubar lekarka. You shouldn't write a get on something which is attached to the ground. Kasvala mechubar lekarka. But if you did, as long as tolsho, you then detached it from the ground. You cut off the tree. Right, or the branch. Chasmo, then you signed it. 1 second, the nasnola, and then he gave it to her. Kasher, then it would be fine. Says the Gemara, but I'm going to take the question in 1 second. Rabbi Eliezer, though, right? If we're talking about Rabbi Eliezer, who thinks that you don't have to sign the contract, as long as the contract is written and given in the presence of witnesses, even if there's no signature at all, that would still be a proper contract. So what does the word v'kasav mean according to Rabbi Eliezer? It means literally v'kasav, telling the story. So Rabbi Eliezer, ksiva boy. So when it says v'kasav la for Rabbi Eliezer, it means ksiva, but kasima lo boy. At least now they think that. We're going to go back on that. But the kasima, the signatures are not necessary. So even if you happen to put them in, which is a good idea, as we'll discuss, right? Nonetheless, why would they require lishma? Right? Okay, there was a question. The Chazan had a question.
No, I understand now. I understand.
The concept that there cannot be anything between mechubar and the sina is just for mechubar.
Between ksiva and the sina.
Huh?
Between ksiva and the sina.
Yeah. No, is that just the mechubar issue, or is it general? So, for example, if somebody wrote a get, and there was a bridge between him and the bridge was down when he wrote the get, so it's impossible for him to give the get. And then after
we had this case, we learned this with the Rosensweig.
We did learn, and when we learned ksuvas,
no, we learned about the guy screaming after 30 days.
Yeah. But that's a little bit of
a different story. I'm saying
it's great that you remembered that, because that is it's very similar case, but it's a little bit of a different issue. What Andy's asking is the question is the problem of mechusar Misa, right, a problem only in mechubar or even for practical reasons? The case of the bridge that we're familiar with is a case where the guy makes a condition.
30-day conditional get.
I'm going to, if I don't come back in 30 days, then then this divorce will go through.
And then the bridge
and then on day number 29, he really wants to come back, and the bridge goes out, and he's screaming on the other side. This is the Gemara Nashaleach later on Daf Lamed Beis. The Gemara says, "Chazi dasoi, chazi dasoi." He says, "Look, I'm trying to make it, but the bridge is out." So that's about a tanai, a condition, and that's the suga of yesh tanai or ein tanai ba'ones, or yesh ones beget or ein ones beget. So you're right about that. That's exactly what it's similar to. But that's about the fulfillment of a condition in a state of ones. Here we're talking about a different point. So in the particular case that you're talking about, it's not going to be a problem.
So it's only mechubar that creates that problem.
If mechubar or something like it, where the mechusar Misa isn't just the delay, but it requires something more like concrete. Like you can't give the get b'mechubar, and because it says v'nasan. So that's more of an objective problem. If it's if
he wrote the get and she was insane at that moment, for example.
Yeah.
So which means that she could not receive the get. Okay. and afterwards she became sane before he presented it. Is that a problem with the kosav also?
Well, writing to get to somebody who doesn't have the capacity, anyways, might be like
No, but she became okay afterwards. But
right.
she
So
was.
that's a question. That's a question for other reasons, but we'll get to it. Can you divorce someone? Can you even begin the proceedings of divorce with somebody who doesn't have, mental competence? So that actually is an issue in its own right. But we'll discuss it. Meaning, when we talk about mechubar a little bit more, we'll see. The case the bridge case is certainly not going to be a problem because that's more of a technical point. But if there was something more mechusar ma'isa that you needed to do, that you could do, that you have to do, or something like that, even this case addressing is an interesting question. And once I think we get to the heart, not today or next week, but in a few, when we get back to mechubar, I think you'll see that it is a good question and a good point. Meaning, is the point that the intention to divorce has to like lead you on a certain trajectory, and there has to be like a straight line between
Cause and
that
effect,
decision
one
and the
after the
ability to implement it. I think that's what you're asking, and there are going to be some cases, where that. But I'll raise another question. It's not our topic right now, but since everybody on the call, enjoys food for thought, and we will get back to it. But this din of this psul of mechubar, because it breaks up the ksiva and the nesina, does it have a parallel in kiddushin? Right, in two different ways, and this is a big discussion. The Rajba on this daf has this discussion. For example, a shtar kiddushin, kiddushin can be accomplished in three different ways, as we know: kasef, shtar, bia. So the shtar of kiddushin is derived from gittin, v'yatzav haisa, right? Makish havaya v'yitzia. We compare a lot of the dinim of kiddushin and of gerushin. So the Rajba raises the question. The Rajba says, listen, let's say you had a shtar kiddushin, and it was written on a tree, right? Or maybe the chasima would that be a problem? Is the din of misha eno, the words, the kasav,
There's no issue of nesina by kiddushin.
Exactly. Well, exactly. The issue of the pasok of the kasav, the nasan, is by gittin. But since shtar kiddushin is derived from a get, is there a similar kind of idea that that there shouldn't be an impediment or an obstacle, that needs to be overcome from the time of the ksivas hashtar to the giving of the shtar? So that is a major debate in the Rajba. Actually, the Rajba goes further.
Kiddushin requires consent. The gittin does not. Gittin requires nesina. Kiddushin does not.
Well, it needs a nesina, but maybe not the same kind of nesina. So I'm with you, but this is 2 days in the Rajba. The Rajba quotes the Bala Itur. They wanted to wonder about something else too. Even since it's Makash Abaya Litzi, is that limited to shtar kiddushin and gerushin? What about kesef kiddushin? Let's say you give, you want to be mekadosh anisha with a tree that is attached to the ground. Can you do that? Yeah, I don't know if it's the most romantic thing to do. Instead of like instead of a ring, you say, "Oh, I give you this tree. With this tree I thee wed," or something like that. So that's an interesting question. Is makish havaya litzia, and therefore psul of mechubar, is that applicable even for kiddushay kesef? If not, what about kiddushay shtar? Or does it have to do, which was what you were suggesting, and which I will try to elaborate because I agree with you, does it have to do maybe with the fact that what I call gerushin is a more unilateral, kind of a process, because it can, min Torah can be bal karcha de isha. So maybe the need for a trajectory, of, eina mechusar, katzitza.
This is a single
maybe
act.
that's a din in gerushin. It's not a din in kedushin.
Since it's a single act by the giver, may require a more complete and immediate completion of that single act. While when it's a consensual thing,
correct. So that I believe that to be true, and I believe that is a key. It could be that we've discussed this other years when when these kind of issues have come up. I believe that to be a really crucial. There's a Mordechai in the beginning of the second parak of Kiddushin that discusses that about shliach l'halaka, like what is the status of appointing an agent to give the get let's say you had parallel to give to be my shliach, to be an agent to take the shtar kiddushin and to deliver it to the isha. Do they have the same rules, or does the unilateral nature of gerushin, change, the outcome? So the Mordechai in the beginning of the second paragraph of Kiddushin quotes somebody called the Kadosh me toys or whatever it is, and he points to the fact that gerushin is bal karcha de isha, can be min Torah, a one-sided affair, and suggests that changes, the way that you look at the role of the shliach laholacha, the agent, because the shliach halacha for gittin, can't be min Torah, cannot be stopped. He's on a mission and reflects the will of the Baal. But as you say, everything about Kiddushin is about the moment of popping the question, and the question whether there's a response, an agreement or not. So the prep, what I would say, this is a very, very crucial issue, which we'll get back to. All the preparatory aspects of Gittin, from a certain point of view, take on like additional Shema, the psul of Mechubar, the tzivui abal, the minui shliach laholacha, they all take on a greater, sense of urgency and stature, because min Torah, this is a more unilateral action, whereas in kiddushin everything is consensual, and therefore remember.
I think you even have the difference when the whole question about how you can throw a shtar into a woman's chotzer when she's still, how at that moment she. Yeah, but when it comes to a regular transaction, I don't think we say that.
So that's a great point too. Again, we're getting a little.
It shows again that there's a difference between a unilateral. Since
that's the comment.
Reuben is giving a get to Sarah, he is doing Reuben's job and Sarah's job at one time.
It's a great point, and actually, you're mechavein. You're on the same wavelength of the ksos hachoshen. The ksos hachoshen on the issue that you're raising, which is, when do you say that? In case everybody's not following, let me just mention that point. Let's say when it comes to Gittin,
Talmud brought it up in Daf Yomi today or yesterday.
Oh, okay. What's the Daf Yomi is doing Gittin now?
Daf Yomi, it somehow came up, or Rabbi Rosner, this issue of the ksos.
Oh, okay. My good Talmud, so he's
yes.
Anyway, so he
mentioned.
What are they up to in Daf Yomi? I'm just curious.
Mem Daled, I believe.
In what, Ksuvas?
The
Yeah.
Durham.
Not Ksuvas, no, Durham.
Oh, they're doing the Dar. Oh, I know why. I get it. Okay. Yeah, there's a Ran in the Darim that everybody quotes. This is the famous Ran in the Darim that the Ksos and the Avnei, in his other work, Avnei Milui, made about how the woman in Kiddushin is kind of, even though she agrees, but it's more like a passive agreement, etc. But in Gerushin, of course, it's can be Bal Korcha. So that's even. So the Ksos says the following: the halacha is that if a person wants to deliver a get by throwing it into the chatzer, into the courtyard or the real estate of the woman. So the real estate of the woman is while she's married to her husband, is also his real estate. So the Gemara says it's fine, it works, because Gita v'yada ba'in kiyachad, that her exclusive reassertion of her ownership
happened at the same moment,
coincides with the receiving of the get. So it can also be the basis of receiving the get. So that's a bit of a catch-22. In other words, I throw the get, the husband throws the get, or the shliach throws the get into the chatzer, into the real estate of the woman. And the reason that it works is because, she regains her real estate because of the divorce. But, that's a little bit tricky, right? She has to be divorced to regain her real estate. She has to have real estate to become divorced. But the Gemara calls that Gita v'yada ba'in kiyachad. So the Ksos HaChoshen says in Choshen Mishpat, a famous piece in Siman, Reish Aleph or something, in Choshen Mishpat, says that in his opinion, the din of Gita Biyada Bain Kiyachad, which is a bit of a catch-22, it's a bit of a paradox. He says it only applies in Gittin. It doesn't apply in something comparable.
Normal transactions.
Because it's Bal Korcha de Isha, the Kso says. And therefore, it's a Nesina. It's not really a Kinyan. The Nesina creates a Kinyan. It's not that the
It
Kinyan
applies, I think, also by an Ebed.
Yeah, so Shichur Ebed might,
Because he's also has no choice,
basically. But in Mekach Memkar, for example, or in Ishus, it wouldn't work because you need consensual. So that, yeah. Anyway, so this whole question of Mechuba, the relationship between Gittin and other areas of halacha is very tricky, but the unilateral nature of it, we'll keep mentioning because I believe it's at the core of a lot of different things. But that source is about Bal Korcha de Isha is very, very important. Anyways, let's get back to where we were. So what are we saying so far?
But you mentioned that, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
you mentioned that she's a shutaf with her husband on the piece of property where he throws the get. Suppose that piece of property belongs to somebody else and she's sitting there only as a schira. In other words, she's renting.
No, right. That it says v'nosam biyada, so it has to really be delivered into her property, into her hand. Literally, it means v'nosam biyada means giving it to her hand.
But is the schirus not part of the other? She has no.
So that's a question whether that goes a little bit to a question that we discussed last year and the year before.
Yeah.
When we were learning Psachim and when we were learning Bava Basra, is schirus kinyan liomei, is
right.
or kinyan lizman kotzuv, is renting something, or is that considered to be like a temporary sale in which the person owns it? Or is that considered to be not a temporary sale? It's a rental. How much full ownership temporarily is there? So that's a question we had in Psachim, for example.
Yeah.
We also had it in Bava Basra. We talked in Bava Basra a little about kinyan chazaka. Beschirus. Is it the same as mechira?
Yeah.
So that's a great question.
Read and understand the document.
What's that?
Does the woman have to be capacitated to read and understand the document?
Yes.
She's illiterate to the language of the document.
No, illiterate, as long as she understands it and it's explained to her, is different.
And who is
incompetent, legally incompetent.
Who is responsible to determine that she understands the document?
So there's, first of all, the requirement of this, again, I don't want to get into this because this is a whole different topic, but since you're asking me, I'll just tell you very quickly. So it says, again, the language of pasok is because of law sefer krisis v'nasam biyada, right? V'shilcha mi beso. So the Gemara says she has to be going on the, so far we were talking today about because of law. And now because of the nasan, the problem of mechubar. But the end of the pasuk, it's all the psukim that we discussed already, is v'shilcha mi beso. So the Gemara says she has to be mishtaleches v'eina choseres. Means she has to understand what the get is. Like if he gives it to her, and she think they have all the oh ma'am, you've been or Mister or Sir. You've been served, sometimes like you get, I don't know if this is true in real law, but, certainly, this is like a popular conception that if you want to serve somebody, with a summons of some sort, that they don't need to know what it is, right? You can give it to them and say, oh, I'm giving you something, you can mislead them. And then you say, ma'am or sir, you've been served. In the Halaka, one of the 10 requirements of a get is that it be given b'toras gerushin, number one. She needs to know, if she thinks that she's getting a gift and then she opens it up and it's a get, that's not a proper gerushin. She has to be able to receive it as a get. That's number one. Number two is she has to be mishtaleches ve'eina choseres. I mean, she has to have, number one, she has to be competent. And part of the competence is that she has to understand the implications of the get, meaning if she gets it and she doesn't understand, that means that, their relationship has been terminated and that she is no longer, that she's been mishtaleches, then that's not a proper get either. It needs to be mishtaleches, be'eina choseres. It has to be b'toras gerushin, not b'toras, let's say, chov or, She
That's
can't
a-
get it under false
vastly different
pretenses.
and
Number
throwing
one.
it into her property line.
Say that again.
That's vastly different than
Yeah.
throwing it into her property line.
No. The throwing into a property line is a case, not that he threw it in property line, she didn't know what it was. She knows that he says to her, Heilach gitech, I'm giving you a get. He's not hiding it. It's not that he throws her something and she thinks it's a newspaper, and then she picks it up and he says, you've been served. No, it has to be B'Torah's Gerushin. He says to her, or the shliach says to her, incoming, where I'm throwing you the get, but instead of handing it in her hand, you can also emplace it in her domain. So if she has a chotzer, she has real estate, and that's her property. So if she knows what it is before, when she receives it, in other words, she knows what it is, number one, and she also has the competence to understand the implications of it. If those two conditions are not met, meaning it's not B'Torah's Gerushin, and it's not Mishalcha, the Eina Choseres, then the get is not Chal. We're only talking about a situation where the technical method that's being used, instead of the literal the Nut and Biada, he gives it to her hand, is like he gives it to her extended hand. Well, an extended hand can mean two things. It can be her hand, her physical hand. That's the best. That's what Torah speaks about. It can be her hand, meaning her shliach, her agent, somebody who she appoints to receive the get. That's called a shliach l'kabbalah. That's also considered v'nasan biyada. And the third one is what's called chatzera, meaning her courtyard, or something that the real estate that she owns that acquires things for her. But it's not. She has to know what it is. She has to be aware of the content of the document, right, in advance. I mean, when it comes into her yad, she has to know what it is. Or the shliach who she appoints has to know what it is. And she has to understand the implications of what a get is, namely that she is mishtalechet ve'ena choseres. If she says, I don't know what that is, and then she thinks that she can stay status quo, that's not a get. A get requires that she be fully informed and fully cognizant of what the implications of the transaction are. Otherwise, it's not valid.
So if the man and woman own a property the size of Manhattan, and he throws it into the Bowery,
it's a private ownership.
But she lives up on the Upper East Side, it would still be a valid get?
Well, if you throw something into somebody's...
She had a big ranch in Texas. Yeah, I guess so.
If you throw in something inside, that's a big chotzer, but she has to know what it is. Again, it can't be that like, oh, you've been served, you thought it was a telegram and it was a summons to appear in court. That doesn't work in Gerushin. That's one of the 10 requirements. If you want me to read it to you, again, I'm just getting a little afield, but if you, here, 1 second. I have my trusty Rambams with me, so that is a good thing. These are part of the initial conditions of a get, by the way, which we discussed a lot already. The Rama begins Hilchos Gerushin by outlining 10 prerequisites for a proper get. Eina isha miskareshes ela biksav sheyagia la. This is the Rambam's statement. The Gerushin requires a text, a document, a contract that she receives, right? Uksav zehu anikra get, basara dvarim, there are 10 requirements, biblically. Hein ikar Gerushin min haTorah ve'elu hein. Lo yagarish ha'ish ela b'rtzono. He has to do this willingly. She'yigarish biksav v'lo b'davar acher, that this be done with a text, not simply verbally. She'yia inyan aksav, the text should say shegirsha v'hisira mikinyano. The text should be clear that it's a divorce and the termination of their bond. It should also make clear that there's no future strings attached, but that, the break between them is Dabra Kores Beino Leveina. B'shia Nichtav Lishma, which is what we're discussing now. It should be written not as a generic, but as a very particular, document. Again, their marriage was very specific, and their divorce should not be generic. It should be personal as well. What are you reading?
To her.
I'm sorry? I'm not sure what you, okay. Let me finish the 10. What's that? That's the din of mechubar that we just read, right? One more time. After he prepares the get, there should be no obstacle that requires another action, right? Like cutting off the get from the ground. That's the din of mechubar that we just read. The sheyitnena law, and that he give it to her, right? Which yitnena law that we means either her or her agent or her domain. Okay. The sheyitnena law bifnei edim, that this, we'll discuss this a lot. This presentation should be done, with witnesses. The sheyitnena law b'torah skerush, and that's what I was just describing a minute ago. He has to give it to her, not masked as something else, but explicitly, as unequivocally, I'm giving you, or you're being presented with a get, not a piece of paper or a present or a stock options, surprise. That doesn't work. It has to be b'torah gerushin. B'shiyeh habal o shlucho hushanos nala, and the person giving it has to be, the Baal, the husband or his agent, etc. And then, as when the Rambam describes the details, he also, mentions this requirement that it be mishtalaches the eina chozera. She has to be at a state of competence to understand the implications of what the get is. And then the Rambam elaborates each of these.
But Rabbi, something occurred to me. The whole, all these halachas of gerushin, get, and everything, basically it's divine, because it's a Rebbeinu Shalom, it's a Torah. The psukim are clear on that.
Yeah.
What has to be done. It
Right.
seems to me that what we do in the Rabbi Amnon in Sanei Tokef, when he talks about tshuva and everything, is v'chosem,
The kosem.
Eskol nishkochos. And that is also the issue of tshuva is also something that we are supposed to do at a certain time. I just wonder whether it's some kind of a chomer ledrush.
I hear.
want to talk about is there something comparable between get and that you need befanai nechtav befanai nechtam, and the issue of tshuva, as Reb Amnon said it in his Sanei Tokef.
Okay, interesting. Well, we'll think. Well, there's something to say about it. I mean, I think when I did speak before, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur this year, I spoke about the parallel between, marriage and the relationship between the Ribono Shel Olam and Klal Yisrael. And I think I did speak about the pasok in Yirmiyah and Yeshaya, one of which seems to say that, when there's a breakdown in the relationship between Klal Yisrael and the Ribono Shel Olam, it's like a get. And the other one which says, I never gave your, ancestors a get. There's never a get. So this idea of, Haisa ke almana, we say in Echa, ke almana, but not almana. And, as bad as things get with the Ribono Shel Olam, there's no divorce between Klal Yisrael and the Ribono Shel Olam.
Yeah.
But, there is an accounting. So there's a ksiva and there's a kasima, on the mishpat. So there's a lot to say. Okay, let's go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says, who is the author of B'fanai Nechtam? It can't be Reb Meir because he only requires Chasima Lishma.
The Shaliach.
It can't be Rabbi Eliezer because he only requires Ksiva Lishma. Right? So we're in the Gemara here on Gimel Amud Beis. So the Gemara says, V'chi Tema, maybe you'll say, Le'olam Rabbi Eliezer he. maybe the author of the Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer, I'm sorry, who says that Ede Mesira Karsi, which means that a contract, this is what we're going to be discussing more, a contract does not require signators. It requires a text, and it requires that it be presented in the presence of Edim. That's the din of Rabbi Eliezer. Maybe he is the one who says you need ksiva and chasima lishma. Why? The chilo boy Rabbi Eliezer chasima lishma midoraisa. Maybe on the basis of biblical law, he doesn't require lishma on anything other than the ksiva. But maybe midrabanan, boy, because as we'll see, the Mishnah says on Lamed Vav Amud Aleph and on Pei Vav Amud Aleph, which we'll see in a moment, the Mishnah says that even Rabbi Eliezer counseled that there should be signators in a contract. Not that you need them, meaning if you don't have them, then the contract will still be valid as long as the text is presented in the presence of witnesses. But it's a wise precaution to have signatures in the document. The Gemara says because this way, if you can't find the physical Ede Mesira, let's say they've been traveling, let's say they're mortal and they passed away in the interim, and you need evidence that the get or that the document, whatever it's reflecting, took place. So having, the signatures of the witnesses gives you a much more effective, raya, proof that the transaction took place. So midrabanan, the Gemara says that mipnei tikkun olam, because it's constructive, they required or they counseled that there should be chasima sa'edim, that even according to Rabbi Eliezer, you should have witnesses signed in a contract, mipnei tikkun olam, so that you can use it as a proof. So now the Gemara thinks.
Why does the Gemara feel that that we have to see according to whom this is said? Because the whole thing is an exception. The whole rule has nothing to do with the standard provision of either of these two Amorim. It has to do with the fact that there's a problem in Chutz La'aretz.
Right, but what is the problem?
Rabba's version or Rabba's version that brings up this crisis that causes.
Right, but what is in Rabba's version? There should either be b'fanai nechtam or b'fanai nechtav. Why is in Rabba's version, which is Lishma, why is there b'fanai nechtav and b'fanai nechtam? Who requires chasima and ksiva Lishma? That's the problem of the Gemara. The Gemara is saying if you're worried about Rabbah and it's a problem of Lishma, then how do you explain the need for nechtav and nechtav? It's not Rabbi Meir, it's not Rabbi Eliezer. We're trying to find who is there any man damar who thinks that you need ksiva and chasima lishma.
We're not taking the position that, all right, since it's so untrustworthy, we're going to make harsher restrictions on them.
No. Not because of that. Not because of that. So the Gemara says that either way, the Gemara says this is not correct. This idea that maybe midrabanan, right? You require lishma for the chasima, for the signatures. Even according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Gemara says that is incorrect. How do we know it? Because of the Mishnah later on. The Mishnah says, "V'ha shlosha gitim psulim d'Rabbanan." Later on, the Mishnah, as we're going to see this in just one more minute, later on the Mishnah declares that there are three categories of contracts that are valid min Torah, and they're disqualified midrabanan. And we'll see that in that Mishnah, lo boy, Rabbi Eliezer, chasima lishma, even though they're talking about, rabbinic as well as biblical requirements, when it comes to Rabbi Eliezer, it seems like he's okay with just, Eda Mesira Karsi and only ksiva and not having chasima at all. How do we know that? It's not. Now, this Mishnah appears, you can look at this Mishnah on the Gemara here, but this same Mishnah, if you look for a minute on Pei Vav Amud Aleph, and it's also the first Mar Makom in the sheets. If you want to look in the sheets, the first Mar Makom in the sheets is the Mishnah on Pei Vav Amud Aleph. So just look at, for 1 minute, just turn to Pei Vav Amud Aleph. What the Gemara is about, the 5 lines that the Gemara is about to quote, come from the Mishnah on Pei Vav Amud Aleph. Let's read it from there because that's the original source.
Hey, Vav.
Hey Vav Amud Aleph, 86a. The same words appear on our Gemara, but if you want to know, like, the real source is in the Mishnah on Pei Vav Amud Aleph. Yeah. So again, these should be aware. I mean, we started our shiur this year with Daf Tzadi Amud Aleph, right? The grounds for divorce and everything like that. One of the things I started by saying, and then we talked a little bit also about the Mishnah in the beginning of Hamagaresh, which talked about, hare, the person says, hareat muteris l'chol adam chutz leploni. You can marry anybody but him. So at the point I was trying to make was that, it's funny that, when I was in Rav Soloveitchik's shiur, I guess at this point, quite a few years ago. So I was in this shiur one year when he learned the Gittin. And he taught Gittin from Perek HaMagarish. He started from the 9th parak, the last parak, and then he went, backwards. He went 9, 8, and 7, I think, or 9, 8, and 6. He skipped 7 actually. So in the beginning of the year, he started off. It was a little bit of a justification. I think, 20 years earlier, he had taught Gittin from the beginning, and he wanted to. He didn't want to do that, so he decided he would start from the end. So he said, as everybody knows, the real place to start in Masechet Gittin is at the end, because that's where the real action is. That's where the core doraisa biblical principles are. And he didn't start with Daf Tzadi with Beis Shammai Basil Rabbi Kiva. I don't remember him doing that actually at all. But what he did start with is, the Mishnah of Chutz, Haret Megureshes, Haret Muteris L'Chol Adam Chutz Miploni. And, very prominently what he really wanted to do, he said, really, you should start Gittin on Pei Vav Amud Aleph, the Mishnah of Gimel Gittin Psul. Again, it was a little bit of an excuse because that he wanted to justify why he was doing that, but it was substantively totally true. I mean, it's a peculiar. The Mefarshim are troubled why the Mishnah on the Beis Amud Aleph and Gittin starts with a din d'Rabbanan on b'fanei nachta b'fanei. What happens if if you send a get from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, you have to say b'fanei nachta b'fanei nachta. It's a din d'Rabbanan. That's the place where you want to start your analysis, which is why we didn't also. Right, we started with more biblical things because we first need to understand what a get is, what a contract is, then what a get is, a specific kind of contract, and then you can understand better, not only the biblical laws but the rabbinic laws of Gittin. Anyways, so this Mishnah here is maybe the most famous Mishnah, either the one that we started with, the Beis Shammai Basil Rabbi Kiva, or this one, Pei Vav Amud Aleph, because it's the foundation of Jewish contract law. It vies for being the most famous Mishnah in all of Masechet Gittin. So the Mishnah says, Shlosha Gittin Psulim. There are 3 Gittin, 3 contracts, divorce contracts, whose status would be that they are disqualified, but only midrabanan, on a rabbinic level. But v'im nisei savlad kosher. This is what we mean. If you were to use them, even though you're not supposed to, the get would be chal min haTorah.
And no mamzeres.
And there would be no mamzeres, meaning that to make it clear, if a woman is married and she's an Eshes Ish, and then she, goes ahead and she marries, or she has a relationship with someone else, and there's a child, that is produced of that illicit relationship while she's still married, that child is a mamzer. So if you use a divorce, if a woman is given a divorce,
then the child will be
which is biblically invalid, right? So then it doesn't work, and she's an Eshes Ish, and the child that would follow from another relationship would be a mamzer. So when the Mishnah says Shlosha Gittin Psulim, there are 3 Gittin that midrabanan you really shouldn't use. We're going to list them in a minute. However, you should know that it's only a rabbinic violation and not a biblical one. V'im nises, if she does marry somebody else on the basis of this improper get, since midaraisa it's a proper get, hablad kosher, the child is not a mamzer. By saying that, that's the Mishnah's way of saying.
But the child from the second husband, of course.
From the second husband. Or not, correct.
Yeah.
That's the point. Meaning she's not an Eshes Ish, even though she lechatchila should not have relied on this get. It is a get b'diavad. What are the 3? Kosa b'ksav yada be'ein alav edim. Let's say the husband himself, he himself pens with his own hand the get.
So there is no need for edim or what?
So Minat Torah, there's no need for
need
Eidim.
for Eidim, yeah.
Savyad, we're going to discuss this more. His own handwriting in
It's the
Gittin.
best proof.
Does it work for Kedushin, by the way? A very big controversy. Very big controversy. But we'll get back to that. But Ksav the handwriting of the Baal, he just writes out, Harayat Materis L'chol Adam, or, Harayat Megaresha Sumateris L'chol Adam, B'dein de Havelechem Minoi, the whole text of the get. He writes in his own Ksav.
No?
What?
Kedushin and Gittin are a different kind of Adam, no?
What do you mean? Say that again?
Back to what you said beforehand about whether Kedushin, the Adam for Kedushin are different, are actually.
Yeah, that's part of our discussion from before, right? These are all things, because of the Yatzav Haisa, in the pasok in Kitetze, and that's the source for kijushtar and many other things. It's this whole, every time you get a get halakha, like it's an open question, what about kiddushin? And there are rules, because of course there are parallels.
I wonder whether Eidei Kiyum or what kind of Eidem.
We'll discuss it. We'll discuss it. All those things we're going to discuss. So Kasab Ksav Ve'enu Levedim is one get. Yesh Alav Eidim Ve'en Bo Zman is the second one. What does that mean? There are witnesses that are signed in the get.
There is no date of the.
But there's no date in the get.
Well, how could that be a get if there's no date on it? You don't know.
Well, the Eidim know the date if you can find them, right? But it's not objectively discernible as a raya in the text itself. I mean, it did take place in a date, at some point, but it's not. That's why midrabanan we're not happy with it, right? But the Gemara says earlier in Daf Yud Zayin, the Gemara discusses two. The Gemara says the requirement of zman in a get is midrabanan, and the Gemara gives two reasons why the rabbinic law required
the requirement to write it down is drabanan, or the requirement to know it is drabanan.
No, to write it in the get.
But you still have to know it.
Yeah, the Gemara says either mishum peri, there could be economic issues related to it, or mishum shema yechapa al basachoso. If there are no date, then there might be a cover up. If there's some illicit behavior, that she's still the mother of my children. There might be. So therefore, the need for azman is mandated in the halacha, but only midraban. Anyways, that's the second get. The third one is yesh bo zman. There's man. The ein bo ela eid echad. But mostly the normal interpretation is you have the sofer, not the baal, not the husband. The sofer writes out a get, so that's the equivalent of his being a witness, right? Because it's his handwriting, not the husband. But that's only one witness, right? So you need another. So it's yesh bo zman, the ein bo ela eid echad, as the Gemara says, it's ksav yad sofer v'eid echad. So those are two witnesses. It's not the preferable way of doing things, but in this
case, the child's not a mamzer, but normally the Chazal take a very
correct. You're totally
somebody
right.
Who breaks the Rabbanon.
Right,
there's no penalty here at all.
Right. So I'll show you. The Balei Tosas discuss that on Daf Gimel and Beis. I'll show you in just 1 minute. Just give me 1 minute. But either way, Harelu Gimel Gittim Psulim v'Nisa Saplad Kosher. Then the Mishnah concludes, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Afal Pishein Ola Eidim. This is Eidim Masira Karsi. You ask what's the source of Eidim Masira Karsi in the Mishnah, right? This is it. Rabbi Eliezer said, even if there were no witnesses signed on the document, but it was simply handed over in the presence of witnesses. I mean, you have a text that outlines the get. It was not signed, but it was handed over in the presence of two witnesses. Kosher, that's a proper get. It doesn't say avlad, it doesn't say pasok avlad kosher, right? This is a higher level. This means it's fine. You don't need chasima, even midrabanan, for Rabbi Eliezer, even though it's a good idea to have it. We'll see in a moment. The govim and the chasim mishubadim. And not only that, but she could collect the ksuva based on this get. And then the Mishnah concludes, she'ena edim b'chos mimala get, according to Rabbi Eliezer, not Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir, you need signatories on the get because that's what the contract is. The contract is the signatures. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it's not true.
According to Rabbi Eliezer, the Eidei Mesira were never even present when the get was written.
They don't have to be.
They don't have to be.
Correct. I mean, if they were, it could be a coincidence. Just like according to Rabbi Meir, the Eidei Chasima don't have to be present when the Mesira takes place. The whole thing is very tricky. We'll discuss it. Our practice and our advice that witnesses should sign on a contract is not a biblical requirement. It's a good advice. What's a tikkun olam? What does that mean? So if you look at Rashi, it's basically this same Mishnah, by the way. This last line appears also in the Mishnah on Lamed Vav Amud Aleph in Parakas Shaleach. I think it's Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. If you look at that for just 1 second, so instead of quoting Rashi, I'll quote the Gemara. 1 second. Here. Is it Lamed Vav? No. Maybe I got
No
it.
Mishnah, Lamed Vav. Oh, no.
There's no Mishnah there? Or maybe the Gemara is on Lamed Vav? Yeah. Yeah, the Gemara is on Lamed Vav. So it's the Mishnah on, yeah. Look at the Mishnah on Lamed Daled Omid Beis for a minute.
Okay.
You see this, it's the second Mishnah.
Almana Nifras.
Ein almana nifras minikse yisomim?
Yeah.
Ela b'shvua.
Please, 1 minute, 1 minute.
So at the bottom of the page, Lamed Daled.
Bottom of the page of Lamed Daled Omid Beis.
Oh, yeah.
Ein almana nifras minikse yisomim ela b'shvua. Nimnu milashbiyad hitkin Rabbi Gamliel Zakein shetei noderis li yisomim kol ma sheyirtzu v'gobek savasa. Fine. Here's the line I care about. Ha'edim chosmim alaget mipnei tikkun olam. That's the same line as appears in Peivav.
Yeah.
The get is signed by witnesses, meaning even according to Rabbi Eliezer, mishum tikkun olam. Now go to the Gemara, since I wasn't completely wrong, on Lamed Vav Amud Aleph for a minute. Look at the Gemara Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, 36a, for those of you who have it.
1 second.
That's where the Gemara elaborates. Va'edim chosmim alaget mipnei tikkun olam. Everybody have it? So go down from the top of it. It's 9. It's about 14 lines down, 13, 14 lines down from the top of the page.
Eidem Chosmim Alaget. Mipnei Tikkun Olam.
Yeah. So the Gemara is according to Mishnah, Eidem Chosmim Alaget Mipnei Tikkun Olam. So the Gemara is Mipnei Tikkun Olam. Doraisahu. It's a biblical obligation for the witnesses to sign.
That's what I keep thinking.
As the pasok says in Yirmiyah, right? The Kasov Basefer, right? They were talking about, in Yirmiyah, about selling the land, and they're going to come back and Babel, the whole bit. The Kasov Basefer Vachason. So it says you write it down, the contract. Talking about selling real estate, Vachasom.
Yeah, but how do you compare that to a get?
1 second. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabba lo tzricha. The Rabbi Eliezer, we're talking about Rabbi Eliezer, the Amar Edim Mesira Karsi. Rabbi Eliezer says you don't need signatures in a get. However, Takinu Rabbanan Eidei Chasima, Midrabbanan, it was suggested to insert signatures. Mipnei Tikkun Olam. Why?
Is he mixing?
One second. Zimnin demaisi sahadi. What's that?
Is he mixing Midoraisa and Midrabanan?
Who?
Rabbi Eliezer. He said, "Dem Yisira Karase," so that's Midoraisa. Tikkun Rabbanan.
Midoraisa, you don't need Midoraisa. Minatora, you do not need Eidei Chasima because Eidei Mesira Karsi. However, Takinu Rabbanan Eidei Chasima, the rabbinic law required Eidei Chasima. Mipnei Tikkun Olam. What's a Tikkun Olam? Zimnin demaisi sahadi. 1 second. The Zimnin demaisi sahadi. Sometimes the Eidim will die, depending on how long all this is.
Yeah.
Inami, Zimnin, a more pleasant thought. Zimnin da'azli lemedinas hayam. Sometimes the Edom will travel, and they won't be accessible if there's some sort of a challenge, right? And therefore, they said, you know what? You should put the signatures in the get, even according to Rabbi Eliezer. And that's only tikkun olam. But if you don't do it, it's not an invalid get, not midaraisa, not midrabanan. Now go back to Gimel Amud Beis for a minute. By the way, you asked me, you said sometimes the Chachamim are very strict that if you don't follow their rules, etc. Look at the Tosas very quickly. Shlosha Gittin Psulim on Gimel Amud Beis. We're going back to Gimel Amud Beis now.
Yeah.
Tosas says, Ika demukila beperik basra hach masisin k'Rabbi Meir. Some people say that this mission, the Reisha, is Rabbi Meir, Eili Chasim Akarsi. And then he has, but there's a bit of a problem. Afal Gav, the Islay Rabbi Meir, isn't Rabbi Meir the one who says, Kol Meshane Mimadbeya Shetivu Chachamim Begitin Havlad Mamzer? Rabbi Meir is the guy who's so strict, who says that, if the Rabbanan, if rabbinic law requires something, then it even turns it's a Vlad Mamzer.
Not always when Chazal say these things is it halachically literal. It's meant to show the severity, but it's not always an halachic literal.
Right. So, but Rabbi Meir, there are different views. Rabbi Meir was very strict about that. So Tosa says, Omar Rabbeinu Tam, Hocha Hainu Tamid Avlad Kosher, the Kachayim Adbeya Shalif Sil Avlad B'Hanak Shlosha. Rabbi Meir said, listen, all things being equal, default, when you have a rabbinic enactment, we take it very seriously. But in this particular case, the rabbinic enactment from the very beginning did not want to go that far.
Huh?
Didn't want to go that far. Okay, anyway, let's go back to the Gemara. So what do you see from the Gemara? Now, going back to our Gemara, the Gemara says, you can't say Rabbi Eliezer thinks midrabanan, you need chasim lishma, because shlosha gitim psulim. Now I'm just going to read it quickly because we just read it, right? So drabanan ditnan, gimel gitim psulim, b'mnisas avlad kosher, kasel b'ksav yada vein olavedim, yesh olavedim vein bazman, yesh bazman vein bo ed yachad, harei gimel gitim psulim, b'mnisas avlad kosher, Rabbi Eliezer mer afal pishein olavedim, elinasim b'fneidim, kosher v'gobin b'chasim shubadim, she'ena edim chosm al get elam b'nei tikkun ha'olam. The reason I didn't translate it is because that's the mission that we just read and discussed. Right? Everybody with me?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're back to square one. We don't know who is the mandamar who requires ksiva and chasima lishma, such that in Medina Hayam to Eretz Yisrael, he has to say not only b'fanai nechtav, and not only before b'fanai nechtam, but also both b'fanai nechtav u b'fanai nechtam. So the Gemara says, El Rabbi Meir he. Maybe Rabbi Meir thinks you need both. B'drabana. B'chila by Rabbi Meir ksiva lishma midoraisa. What we just tried to say for Rabbi Eliezer, it didn't work, right? Because the evidence is against it, and maybe it'll work for Rabbi Meir. Maybe Rabbi Meir thinks that midrabanan you need ksiva lishma, but midrabanan, boy, says the Gemara, it's not true, because we have more evidence that proves that even that's not true. What's the evidence? This is an interesting evidence. Listen to this. Ha'amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, Omer haya Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir used to say, his students came out, they said, that isn't true. Because he always used to tell us, right, that afilu matzu ba'ashpa. Let's say you found in the garbage dump. It doesn't mean it could be anywhere, right? You found a get with exactly the same names. Michael and Barbara, I don't know, John and Jane, Bill and I don't know, and whatever. So
Jack and Jill.
Jack and Jill. Maybe it was a real get from another Jack and Jill, right? So I feel a matzah ba'ashpa, the chasmo, but then the chasima was lishma. That's okay.
And it's kosher.
Because according to Rabbi Meir, we only care about when they signed for this Jack and Jill, not for that Jack and Jill. Right? The Nasnu law, kosher. Maybe this is only Doraisa, but Midrabanan it's not true. It says Omer Hayar Meir. This is what he used to say. Obviously, he wasn't just telling you a theoretical Doraisa law. He was telling you in practice.
But it seems that if he found it in the ashpa,
yeah.
So was that intention there in the get? Was the way it's in the garden?
No. It wasn't written for these people even. It was just the same, Jack and Jill.
So that means that you don't need a ksiva lishma.
According to Rabbi Meir, you don't.
Yeah.
You only need chasima lishma. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it seems like you only need ksiva lishma and you don't need chasima lishma.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Who thinks you need both? So the Gemara says, Ela liolam Rabbi Eliezer. Really, the author is Rabbi Eliezer. Chila by Rabbi Eliezer chasima heichad aleka edim klal. Rabbi Eliezer said that you don't need chasima at all. However, but heichad deika edim, by once you do mishum tikkun olam, they said you should have signatures in the get, right? Once you do, that has to be lishma.
Who's the one that said this?
Just 1 second. What?
Who's the one that said the tikkun olam?
Tikkun olam is the Mishnah says that even Rabbi
In other words,
Eliezer.
we have this machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer, and we're
Right.
trying to figure out who said in the nechtam. But who is the one that said, oh, because of tikkun olam? Was this another set of Amoraim?
No. Tikkun olam appears in 2 Mishnayos. That's what I just showed you. It's the Mishnah on Peivav. It's Rabbi Eliezer, and it's repeated earlier in the Mishnah on Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. It's a Mishnah, not Amoraim. But the Gemara, the Mishnah in Peivav, attributes it to Rabbi Eliezer.
Why would we not say that the reason that it says nechtam is because we cannot resolve the difference between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer? And to be on the safe side, we said that when it comes to
Because that's a great point, except that as we'll see, we paskin, everybody paskins like Rabbi Eliezer, at least in Gittin. That seems to be
Rabbi
not
Meir
controversial.
short shrift anyway in most cases.
So anyway, the Amar Abba, listen to this. Moda Rabbi Eliezer b'mezuyaf mitocho shehu pasol. We'll discuss what that means. But Rabbi Eliezer says, listen, you don't need Eidei Chasima, but if you have Eidei Chasima, then they have to be according to the standard of Lishma. If they sign, then they have to sign Lishma.
So you're
Is that
better
good
off with
advice?
no signature than a signature that's not lishma.
Say that again?
You're better off with no signature than a signature. that's
Except
not-
that you need the signatures for the Tikkun Olam.
Hmm.
So you're in a little bit of a trouble, right? Now, is this a din doraisa or manan that Moda Rabbi Eliezer b'mezuyaf?
How strong is
We'll argue, we'll discuss it. Rashi and Tosas think it's a din d'Rabbanan, and we'll see that some of the Chachmei Sfarad think that it's a din d'Oraisa. That once you have signatures, then the signatures also need to be lishma.
but how strong halachically is tikkun olam?
No, Tikkun Olam itself is only d'Rabbanan, but the result we'll see. We'll
All right,
explain.
but we have to accept it. I mean, the Rabbanan,
Once you have to do it, it becomes part of the shtar, even though you didn't need it. You don't need to put in chasimos. But if you put in chasimos, maybe the way the Rajba puts it, I'll just tell you now, but we'll discuss it. The way the Rajba puts it is, the Torah says v'kasav. So if you have a minimum ksiva, because you just have the story and you don't have signatures, then that's v'kasav. You don't need chasima because they're not missing. But let's say you tell a more expansive story, but you didn't need to. Is that expansive story part of the story?
well, who
Yes.
knows?
That's the
Once you
Rajba.
said it, you put your foot in your mouth, so to speak, and
So that's the Rajba's idea of Mod Rabbi Eliezer Mzuyaf Mitah. But Rashi and Tosas don't interpret that way. We'll discuss it when we get to it. Let me just finish these few lines, and then I want to tell you what the big issue that we're going to discuss next week is. Rav Ashi Amar Hamani Rabbi Yehuda. He had another suggestion. He says, you know what? Rabbi Yehuda thinks that Ksiva and Chasima are required. He's a different Mandamar. Titnan. We learned in the Mishnah on Chafalith about Mechubar that Rabbi Yehuda, the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda posel ad should take Ksivasa v'chasimasa b'talish. Rabbi Yehuda said that if you write a get on a tree, and then you cut it off before the chasima, it doesn't help you. There needs to be ksiva and chasima b'talish. So he's the one who says b'fanaynak. Says the Gemara, my time alone. Why do we have to work so hard if we have Rabbi Yehuda? So the Gemara says, Mahadrinan or Meir the Stam Masis and Rab Meir. Now we look for Rab Meir because in most Mishnayos we pass like Rab Meir. Mahadrinan or Belazar the Kaimel and Hilchos Kivase begitin, because we really pass like Rab Belazar and Gittin. Okay, so with it, so far what do we have? We have an interesting debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Meir, whether Eidei Mesira Karsi, Eidei Chasima Karsi. That's what we're going to examine next week. And the Gemara says that it affects Minatorah, whether V'kasav means V'kasav or V'kasam. Do you need Ksiva or Chasima Lishma? Which one? It affects whether mechubar's posel disqualifies at the time of the ksiba or the time of the chasima, right? And then the Gemara in the ends up saying that Rabbi Eliezer agrees, however, if you have chasimos, which you should, bishum tikkun olam, that, moder Rabbi Eliezer b'mezuyach mitocha. The big question is this. In this debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Meir, whether Edi Masira Karsi or Edi Chasima Karsi, are these mutually exclusive ideas or not? Meaning, does Rabbi Meir think, Rabbi Meir says you need Edi Chasima, you have to have signatures in the contract. If you didn't, but you had witnesses present at the time of the handing over of the text, would that work? So almost, not all Rishonim, but almost all Rishonim say that according to Rabbi Meir, if you don't have written signatures, then even the presence of witnesses at the time of the presentation is not good enough. In other words, only Edi Chasima worked for Rabbi Meir. The bigger question is, what about Rabbi Eliezer? When Rabbi Eliezer said that Edi Masira Karsi, you don't need signatures. You can get away with presenting the text in the presence of witnesses. Does he mean that's the only thing that works? Let's say you have Edi Chasima, no Edi Masira. What will he say then? Meaning, Rabbi Meir rejects Rabbi Eliezer. 1 second. Rabbi Meir rejects Rabbi Eliezer. Does Rabbi Eliezer in the same way reject Rabbi Meir? So this, I'm just going to tell you now, and this is what we're going to discuss next week. This was one of the most fierce debates, halachic debates of all time, which, for centuries, the Balei Tosfos, Rashi, the Chachmei Ashkenaz, Rabbeinu Ephraim is an exception in the world of Sfarad, the Balamor, many of the Chachmei Provence, all of them said, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Edi Masira Karsi works, Edi Chasima min Torah does not work without Edi Masira. However, the Rif, the Rambam, the Ravid, the Ramban, the Rajba, the Ra'ah, the Ritva, it's like an evenly matched, fierce debate. They all said it's not true. Rabbi Eliezer thinks that Af Edi Masira Karsi, he doesn't say it that way, but according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you don't have witnesses signed in and you have witnesses present, that works. But if you only have witnesses signed in and don't have witnesses present, that also works. This is a massive debate, and the discussion, the proofs back and forth, and the debate itself has huge repercussions practically and also conceptually. Like, how do you really understand what is a contract? Is a contract, a typical, kinyan, in which case, the Masira handing over the document is kind of the critical moment? Or is a contract really about providing the other party with evidence of the transaction? Meaning it's the evidentiary, the raya aspect of it that is the actual davar hakonen. This seems to be the fundamental argument about contracts between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Meir. We're going to discuss it and explain it better next time. And the question of, again, we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, begittin. So this is, as the Gemara says. So let's say you were to give a get, be'edi chasima, without edi masira. Would there be a gerushin in Torah or not? So Rashi, Tosfos, Malamor, that whole group, they say absolutely, absolutely, according to Rabbi Meir, right? I'm sorry, according to Rabbi Eliezer. If you had edi chasima, bli edi masira in a get, according to that whole group, it's nothing. She's an Eshes Ish. And the Rif and the Rambam and the Ramban and the Ravid and so on, they all say that is not true.
Is it the Ashkenaz versus the Sephardi in this?
Mostly. And Provence is split in the middle.
Provence was always in the middle.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of Sephardim that
Provence was always the bridge between the two.
Rabbeinu Ephraim, who is a Talmud of the Rif, he's on the Ashkenazi side of this debate for some reason. But most of these Chachmei Sfarad, meaning the big ones, the Rif, the Rambam, the Ramban, the Ra'ah, the Rajba,
so the Shulchan Aruch,
the Ran.
So the Beis Yosef would pass in that way also, then.
Yeah, I mean the Shulchan Aruch, yeah. So this is a major, major debate, I want to examine next week. This is what you have in the Marmakomos in front of you. We're going to go through Tosas Dibur Maschel the Kaimalon Halaka Rabbi Eliezer on the bottom.
And the Rush and the Torah on the side of the Ashkenazim?
Yeah. So the Tosas on the bottom of the page, the Kaimalon makes the case for the Ashkenazim group, meaning that if you hold Eidi Masira Karsi, then Eidi Chasim alone will not work. And we're going to read the Rif,
I mean,
and the Rambam, and the
Pshuto
others,
Shel
and the Ram.
Mikra would sound like that. The Pshuto Shel Mikra would sound like the Ashkenazim. I mean, when you look at the Machlokas at face value, one is saying one and one is saying the other.
I mean
Eat
because
into
the
it
Kosav means the Kosav.
that Rabbi Eliezer is saying that Chasima would work also is a little bit of a read, no?
I don't
I
think
mean, the
it's
normal
so.
Machlokas is that one says one and one says the other. Not
Well,
one.
Yeah, so your idea a little bit. I don't think it's such a strong proof, but what you're saying is something that Rabbeinu Ephraim says. Rabbeinu Ephraim says like this. I think this is what you're arguing. He says, listen, Rabbi Meir certainly rejects Rabbi Eliezer. So doesn't it make sense that Rabbi Eliezer would also completely reject Rabbi Meir? Now, I don't think that's such a logical argument. I think you need to explain that a little better. Just because, A says that B is wrong.
No, but if we look at the thousands of machlokas in the Talmud, an overwhelming majority read like that. A says one thing, B says the other, and they're at opposite ends.
First, I'm not sure that's true. And even if it is true, it has to be case by case. Meaning, what the Rif and the Rambam and those are saying is everybody agrees. There's no problem with Eidei Chasima Karsi. The controversy is about Eidei Masira alone, or maybe that's what they're saying. We'll get to it. We'll analyze this. This is, as I say, we have to go through these Gemara just to understand the background and so on. But what I want to do the next, a couple of shiurim is to discuss this very impassioned, very consequential, very fierce, almost 50-50, debate on this.
Are both Eidei Chasim and Eidei Masira the same quality type of Eidim as each other?
Well, the same. They both have to be proper Eidim.
No, but I mean, as far as what it is that they're giving their Eidim for.
No, so that's when I said the conceptual nature of the argument, like what really is a contract. That's what I mean. So that's part of what we're going to discuss. It's very tempting to think that we're not just dealing with a technical argument, are the Eidim, written in, or are the Eidim present at the moment of the presentation, but that question itself is a very basic question about the nature of what a contract is. What I said before about
the nature of what the witnesses are.
Yeah, I mean, is it more about providing evidence of a transaction, or is it more about, let's say, providing stature to the transaction itself? So that is a kinyan kind of kinyan, or a raya kind of a kinyan, is the way we sometimes explain it. So that's something that we will discuss hopefully next week. As I say, this is a big contract issue. So next week we have regular share, right, Jacob?
Yes.
Is it the week after that we are going to have a Hanukkah share?
Yes, on Hanukkah.
On Hanukkah. And I'll give you information. I think I'm going to be giving a yahrzeit share, which I always do every year, in memory of my mother. But I think that will be on either the Wednesday night or the Thursday night. I'll probably know in the next
So it
day.
won't conflict with our Tuesday. You're doing that at YU Live, or what are you doing?
Yes, that'll be in YU Live. And everybody who is interested in coming,
there'll be a
is
Zoom,
certainly
right?
welcome. We'll get out the information for that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Shkoff.
Okay, have a good week, everybody.
Yeah,
Rabbi,
thank you very much. Yeah.
This
Rabbi,
argument
can I ask
next week.
a quick question before you leave?
Sure.
Giving a star, talking about a get, is it chal as long as the star is given, or does the husband giving his wife the star also have to give the payment that's called for in the ketubah for it to be chal?
One more time.
If in the ketubah it's written that if there's a certain value that the husband has to give the wife.
Okay. So the get is independent of the ksuba, if that's what you're asking. The get triggers the divorce. The ksuba relates to the financial consequences of him either dying early or divorcing her. So what the get does is it triggers the conditions of the ksuba. For example, when the Mishnah says, that according to Rabbi Eliezer, right, Edom Mesira Karsi, and that if the Edom, even if there are no signatures in the get, the presence of the witnesses and then handing over the get in their presence is a get. Then the Mishnah says, "V'goveh min nechasim mishubadim," and then there will be collection from liened property. So the simple pshat is that also, could refer to the ksuva, meaning once is a get, that triggers the applicability of the ksuva. But the ksuva is a separate document. The ksuva applies upon divorce, and that's why it's triggered by the divorce. But the divorce doesn't depend on the ksuva. The ksuva begins after the divorce. But remember that the ksuva also applies if the husband predeceases his wife. It's an event of either death or divorce.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if the ketubah took effect before he paid the money or only after he paid the money, and you just answered the question.
What do you mean
Before-
paid the money? Paid the money for what?
That's in the ketubah, because it's tied to
The
if he gets
ksuba is the
divorced.
monetary, separation agreement between them, and that is applicable as soon as there is a divorce or as soon as he dies.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Have a good week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you.